Hello, everyone. Welcome to City Lights. I'm Peter Maravella. So those of you online, welcome. As always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ohlone people, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. I want to take this moment at the beginning to pay our respects to those who have come before us as stewards of the land. So tonight, always a pleasure to have Ian with us. He is just an amazing, amazing producer and author and friend of City Lights, I should say. And also to have Peter Case here with us is a great treat as well. PM Press and City Lights are celebrating Ian Brennan's new book, Missing Music, Voices from Where the Dirt Roads End. And it's introduced by Marilena, his wife, who's an amazing photographer, and it's got a foreword by Dame Evelyn. Missing Music details Ian's ongoing quest to provide musical platforms for underrepresented nations and populations around the world. The book collects his latest narratives from field recording treks. It is filled with stories and photos. Really magnificent, magnificent collection. Ian is a Grammy-winning producer and author who's written numerous books. In the past decade, he's produced over 40 records by international artists from 5 continents, which have resulted in the very first widely released original music album from nations such as Rwanda, Malawi, Kosovo, South Sudan, and many, many other places. He has worked with such artists as Fugazi, Merle Haggard, Sleater Kinney, but also the Zomba Prison Project, the Good Ones, the Malawi Mouse Boys, amongst many others. His writing has appeared in the New York Times. He's also been on PBS and also in an Emmy-winning segment of 60 Minutes. So really fabulous to have Peter Case with us too. Great musician, and has tremendous amount of meaning for me because I remember him from the band The Nerves back in the 70s. You probably remember Hanging on the Telephone, which Blondie made really popular. Well, that was originally created by The Nerves, and I think that was a better version. That's just me talking now, but hey, he also formed the group The Plimsolls. And he's done a lot of his own work. I mean, he put out the album The Man with the Blues Postmodern Fragmented Neo-Traditionalist Guitar, also Six Pack of Love, Torn Again. I mean, he's worked with such musicians as Cindy Wasserman, Bert Devert, Lee Frontier, many, many others. Really such a pleasure, man, to have you both with us here tonight in the Poetry Room at City Lights. Welcome.
Peter. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Peter. It's a wonderful name, Peter. But I'm very happy to be here with my friend Ian, talking about this new book, Missing Music, Voices from Where the Dirt Roads End. And, I really enjoyed reading this book. One thing about this book, it's worthwhile to read this book because it will tell you, it doesn't rehash a lot of things you already know, for one thing. Oh, well, there goes my ride. But it doesn't rehash a lot of it's new stories from new places that you haven't really heard this kind of story about. And I think it's fascinating to hear the story of Ian going to these places and dealing with the terrain and the situations that he gets into there. So there's a lot of beautiful stories about the music and the musicians and reflections about it. And there's also an ongoing polemic throughout the book. And so there's kind of 2 strands in the book. And we'll talk about those as we go along here. I'm not really that organized as usual. What was I going to start with here? I'm interested in how you establish these trips and how you decide where you're going to go, and how did you decide to go to these particular locales, and how you made contact. I'm interested in some of the background that maybe is not in the book. It was fascinating, and I'm going, well, how did that all work?
Right.
And so maybe if we can start by talking a little bit about the background of like a couple of the trips, maybe, or 1 or 2 of them or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, thank you for reading the book. That's great. I do a lot of book events with people who've not read the book, and I'm totally fine with that. I'm great with that too. But yeah, it's the main answer is that every single situation has been different, but they're all founded on the belief that there's music everywhere. And so if you go looking for it, you will find it, as difficult as it may be. And usually the music is found through people. It's not found on the internet, that's for sure. You got to talk to people, and then they'll tell you to talk to somebody else, and they'll tell you to talk to somebody else, and they'll tell you to talk to somebody else, and eventually you get there. Almost every single time. And failure to get there would never mean that there isn't music there. I mean, just because I wouldn't find it in X amount of time doesn't mean there's not music. But there's so much music really that it's not that difficult to find, but it certainly is difficult to find music of quality. And so sometimes that's because areas are so impoverished, there's little opportunity, little instruments, unless they make them, which oftentimes they do, but sometimes they don't. The traditions have largely been severed that were, existing until just a few generations ago, which is not that different than America either, where music making was a part of everyday life until radio. And then with television killed it more, and then internet killed it even more. And so, it's sometimes hard to find for these reasons, but we go there, and unfortunately there are more places underrepresented or unrepresented in international mass media than there are that are represented. So there are only 3 countries in the world that export more music than they import, and that's America, England, and Sweden. And we're talking about exclusively English language music. So Sweden, the exportation is of English language music, not of Swedish language music. And so that tells a lot about the whole story right there. And so people get trapped within their own borders and their own linguistic borders. And so what we see a lot when we travel, it's not that people have no choice, and it's not that necessarily they're subjected to this, and therefore they begin to bend to the music that they're subjected to. It's just that in public spaces, it's controlled by corporations, and it's the same way here. And the corporations want nothing more than for us to listen to as few voices as possible, because they make more money that way. And so they're reducing it more and more. And so as we go along, we look at, it seemed like maybe the people that had dominated the platforms and the discourse for all these decades since the 60s, maybe that was going to wane. And right then is when all these private corporations started gobbling up these song catalogs for 100 million, 50 million, 300 million, 200 million. So anybody who doesn't think they want our future to sound exactly like our past is dead wrong. It's going to be more like our past, because they don't have to ask anybody's permission with what to do with it anymore. So that's why they pay this big money, because they don't have to go to the family and say, is it okay if we use this song for a tampon commercial? They're just going to do it. And it's already happening. But that's public spaces. In private spaces, there's still hope.
I see. No,
that's
great.
The short answer.
Now, so when you're going to go visit a country, do you buy the ticket first and then go and then do like a detective number on the street, like walk around and talk to people, sort of like a man on the street? You heard any music? Who's would you just go to a place without actually having a directive in mind to a particular artist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of the time we go in blindly. Most of the time we don't know anybody. Most of the time we don't know there's any music, but every situation is different. And the gentleman who just walked in right now is an example, Stephen, who was in South Sudan. I didn't know South Sudan existed. He was living in South Sudan. And I'm like, what's South Sudan? This was 2013. And he's like, well, it's this brand new country. I'm living there. And I'm like, okay, well, I want to go there. And so he helped us out. We went there. We recorded 3 albums there. He's got a shirt from one of them, a Choli Machan. So, and that was the first year that South Sudan was in existence as a new nation. So, that in a sense was easy but hard, because things were very chaotic there in the country. But there was a lot happening, because the capital city had not been the capital city, which means it just exploded with growth and people, and it was just chaotic because people were learning to drive, and so people were driving on the wrong side of the road, and there's just where they were was way outside of town, and we would drive, and there'd be development, encampments the whole way, and they told us, well, none of this was here 6 months ago, like before you left the town, and then you would drive for all these miles and there was nothing, and it was just all filled up with people. So every situation is different, but in general, yeah, we go in blindly and we don't know what's going to be there, but we've been really lucky to find things, and we really are committed to the idea that just because we record something doesn't mean that it should be a record. that we try to only put out things we really believe in. So this record right here, which is yours for free if you buy a book, not my book, any book, tonight. This came out on Friday, and it's one of the chapters in the book. It's from São Tomé and Príncipe, which is a very small country. It's in the Angola language, which is a minoritized language within the country. And that record right there is a record that a lot of people would hate, you know, for sure. Like they would think that it's bad, but to me, it's great. But most people wouldn't like it. And so, it comes with the warning, like you said, it'd probably have a warning sticker, but it's a punk rock record. It's Fisherman. There's not one person on that record that thinks they're a musician. Not one. Usually there's one that kind of maybe, holds it up a little bit on the corners, but no, not on this record. And I like this record, but I can see, most world music people would be doing this going nuts, and because a lot of the world music people like virtuosity. They want to hear they like, somebody who can really play or somebody that can really sing. And to me, this is beautiful music in a beautiful language, and an endangered language, and a people that were forgotten from the beginning. They were discovered by the colonialists that they had escaped from when they were enslaved, when the slave ship crashed. And then years later, decades later, they were living in the southern part of the island, and the Portuguese found them right there. They'd been on the island, but the island is so forested, they didn't even know they were there. So they re-enslaved them. And they remain the people that within the population that are speaking this minoritized language and are looked down on as, fishermen and beneath us and low, and their language is incomprehensible to the people on the island otherwise, because they're speaking a dialect that they've created from inner Angola where they were captured. And that's not the language that the people on the island speak.
Ian, I feel like it's really it's appropriate to be in this room talking about your work, because in a way, more than being a musical ongoing project, in a lot of ways, it's a poetic project where you're discovering things about the everyday world around the world. And so that's really beautiful. I loved a lot of the music. I was able to not find quite a bit of it, though not all of it, on Spotify. I have to admit, I use Spotify, and I figured since they never really pay me for what I gave them, that I may as well, what goes around comes around. But there's a lot. The records are very beautiful, and they are done in a way where if you're expecting to hear, you what you need to do is you listen through it to the human aspect of it, which is what's really great about it. It's what I listen to for music myself. Really, I've never really been interested in the great lead guitar players, outside of Jimi Hendrix or something like that. We used to hear the joke, look at me, look at me, look at me, wow, look at me, the big guitar lick, that they play. But I'm interested about you because since I've known you, you've had a lot of different things that you've done, and you've transformed yourself into different as you went along. When I met you, I believe you were working at the hospitals teaching anger management and triage, and were a local musician, songwriter. And then you became a concert promoter, and you became a real concert promoter around here, and had some far out concerts. You put on some big shows just out of the blue kind. And I remember every time I ran into you, when you promoted me, you'd always lose your shirt. Remember that? Yeah.
Oh, I do.
I'm surprised you even have a shirt at this point.
I'm keeping track.
but no, we had some good gigs. Yeah,
we did.
But you would say that sometimes about other shows. And then, and you had those great shows with John Waters and Merle Haggard, and incredible shows, that were really interesting. It must have been something to convince Merle Haggard to go out and take a chance on doing the kind of show that you did with him. So I find that's really interesting. But then you became a record producer.
Right.
And when I heard you were a record producer, and I knew that you've been doing anger management stuff, I go, this is the guy that could probably produce me. Because this has always been the problem somewhere in the record. You need an anger management consultant.
Sure.
With me. And so that worked out really well. And we did get nominated for a Grammy, and we had a really great time to do that. Yeah. But I'm interested in that journey because at some point there, you found this calling, is what it seems like to me, to become a producer of field recordings.
Right.
And can you talk a little bit about that transition from the recording studio to the out to. I remember one time you told me like your main job on recordings was, you were joking, but you said, I set up the microphones and then keep, lizards off the. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. I mean, my job is to do as little as possible and to potentially do nothing at all. I mean, other than hit record, to just be a listener and to give people attention and support and have faith in their abilities. And I'm most excited by the quote unquote non-musicians, because I believe there's music in everybody. So those projects, when they turn out, especially when they turn out, are really is really a beautiful thing. So when somebody says I'm a musician, I'm usually like, whoa, like this is not what I'm interested in. They're everywhere. They'll come in and they've got the costume, like whatever it is, they got the look, they got the guitar. They're usually pretty good, like technically, but it's there's no heart in it. It feels like when somebody says they're not a singer, but they're willing to sing, that's usually when I'm like, okay, we're about to hear something really good potentially. I mean, it's hit and miss, but usually you're about to hear something very beautiful. And I'll give you an example of that. Was with Witch Camp in northern Ghana, with the women who were accused of being witches. We went around to different encampments, and we were in one that was one of the official camps where they weren't hidden, and it was evangelical, and they didn't really want us there because of the nature of the way they ran things, and they weren't very comfortable with our presence, the people in charge. And so the women were coming in and singing, and the people in charge were pushing us out, kind of pushing us out. And it was like, yeah, just 5 minutes more, 10 minutes. I mean, we weren't there long. Like, they gave us very little time. But there was this one woman that was standing outside looking really, really angry, And the one thing I know about anger from teaching it is that when people are angry, they're not angry. They're actually sad and afraid and frustrated, but they're hiding it beneath the armor of anger. And so she was standing there looking angry, angry, angry. And then we're done. Like, they're like, you got to go. There's no one else. No one else wants to do this. No one else wants to sing for you. You got to go. And the woman was standing there. And finally she goes, I want to sing. And they're like, oh, no, we don't have enough time. And I'm like, no, we're going to do this. No. I'm like, 2 minutes. We're going to record. So she comes in there and she just like opens her mouth and lays down this song that's made up the song on the spot. It's one of the most incredible things I've ever heard. So direct. And it's You Left Me to Live Like an Animal is the song, where she's talking about her family abandoning her and the way she was treated. And it's to record something like that, it's magic. And it's sad, but it's magic. And so that's really the goal, as you were talking about, is the humanity, the intimacy, the voice, foregrounding the voice. A lot of the records are a cappella. They're just voice. There's no embellishment beyond that. But none of it was planned at all. I mean, every step of the way. I just know that by making bad records, I learned how to make better records. And so my loss is other people's gain, so to speak. It's not the only way to make records, but in general, I make them as painlessly as possible. And so, and as true as possible and as unmediated as possible. So when I did the record with Raymond Antrobus and Evelyn Glennie, who Evelyn wrote the foreword for the new book. She's the only deaf musician that's ever won a Grammy. She's won 2. She's been nominated 5 times. And so Raymond, who's right up there, his new book, Signs Music, is one of the best poets of his generation. So I got them together. They never met. They never worked together. And the plan was, you're going to get together. We're going to record without her ever having looked at the poems, heard the poems, knowing what he was going to do, or vice versa. So we get there to her place, which is in Midlands, England. And one of the things I'm good at, if nothing else, is setting up really quickly, because I believe it's all about energy, and you don't know what's going to happen. A lot of times the cops are coming, or the local thugs are coming, or the sun's going down, or it's about to rain, or a windstorm's coming. You don't know. So it's like, let's do this while we can, because this is it, And so I set up, and, they were chit-chatting, and like 20 minutes later, I'm like, all right, let's go. And they're like, what? And I'm like, no, let's go. You're ready? And I'm like, yeah. And so at first they were a little bit, whoa, like they wanted to prepare themselves. I'm like, let's go, let's do it. And so we recorded like 32 pieces in like 2 hours, and it was just incredible. And all she did was just respond to him. I mean, she's immensely talented, and so is he. And there was magic in that. And never recording the same thing twice. Just going straight through, never listening to what we're recording, just keeping it all in the right brain, non-judgmental, just perform. You got the rest of your life to listen to it, edit it, whatever. Just record, just create, and don't judge it. And so that's what I believe in. But none of this was planned. The concert promoter thing was all just for charity, purposes, trying to raise money for different causes. But yeah, it led to some interesting things, and they were educational. I mean, I learned more about singing when Merle Haggard played at the little theater here at USF. I learned more about singing when he was sound checking, and I was walking from the stage to the back of this little room, and he dropped this note down into his chest. And I went, oh, that's what singing is, right? Like I could just feel in this empty room what he just done, like where he was just playing around. And speaking of that, it just reminds me that same theater, I did a show with Chris Christopherson. So Chris Christopherson passed away the other night, and I did a couple of shows with him. I haven't been in contact with him or his wife for a long, long time, but I did a show with him and Steve Earle down at UCLA, and he did the show here. And the show here was one of those interesting shows because he was not playing music for a long, long time. And there was this agent, I'm remembering all this now, but there was this agent that was, kind of a hotshot agent. And I don't remember why this guy was interested in me, but he wanted me to do shows, and he had this whole list of people, and he took me out to eat when I first moved to LA for a while. And we were at some restaurant, and Forrest Whitaker was there, and that kind of restaurant, lunchtime in Hollywood and whatever. And he's like going, yeah, this person, this person, this person. I said, well, I looked at your list, and the only person I would want to do a concert with would be Chris Christopherson. And he's like, oh, no, he doesn't do concerts anymore. He wouldn't want to do it. And I'm like, well, I'd want to do that. And he's like, yeah, he wouldn't want to do it. And I'm like, well, ask him, just ask him. And so I gave them a date, got specific, said, well, how about this date? We'll do it for charity. We'll do it here. And it turned out he was going to be on vacation in Tahoe, and he wanted to do it because he wanted his kids, his younger kids, he has 8 kids, I think, wanted his younger kids to see him play. So it was just totally a family thing. And he played. Then he went on to start playing all the time again. Right. But it was cool. It was great. It was awesome. But it was never, ever intentional, any of it. And I still today, over 31 years later, am teaching violence prevention. I taught 2 different classes today, one in West Oakland, one in San Mateo, and now I'm here.
Pretty cool, man. You've got the light touch of a safecracker. As a record producer, that's the way I felt. Like those movies where the guy comes in and he just touches the safe, and Hogan's Heroes or whatever it was, But you've got that, and somehow you have a way of navigating these difficult situations, and I do appreciate it, and I'm in awe of it too. What was it like the first trip believe you went was to Mali when you went to, and you ended up recording Tanarawan? Is that on the same trip?
Well, yeah, actually, the very, very first trip overseas, and what led to being sort of willing or not having a big psychological block about this was that when I realized I wasn't going to go where I thought I could go as a songwriter, I just wanted to play somewhere every week acoustically, just to be in tune with the espresso machine, just to respond to what was there. No, seriously, yeah. Right? As an experiment. Yeah. And the unhoused person going by with their grocery cart, and try to play in tune to that as it happened. And so I would do that every week and bring in different groups, and I started recording people every week. And I felt like I should record people that I don't like a lot, not just people I do like, and try to listen to them and figure out what people like about them, their 20 friends that go watch them. And what I found is almost all of them had one good song. So I learned that you could record anywhere. So then when we went overseas places, it was not intentional, but suddenly it was like, oh, well, I've done this in a laundromat in south of Market. I can do this anywhere. So I was able to start doing that, even though I wasn't an engineer. So the first place was Rwanda, which is where Marilena's mother's from. Then not long after that, yeah, we did the Tanarawan record in Southeast Algeria. They're from Mali, but it was recorded in Southeast Algeria because already there was a lot of trouble brewing and happening in Mali. And so we did it there. And where we did the record in the Sahara was just across the border from Libya. And this was about 90 days before the Arab Spring, when all hell broke loose. And it was only about, it's as a crow flies, very close, but really close to a thing that people probably don't remember, where there was a terrorist attack on an oil refinery, and it went on for 3 days, and they held people hostage, and all that stuff happened there. But we were there in this beautiful little window before all that happened, and it's beautiful and peaceful, and it's just incredible, the area where we recorded. And so yeah, that was the beginning of recording outdoors. It was when we did that. But before, just so I don't forget, we should talk about city lights, right? We should talk about city lights because it means a lot to me. And Denise is telling me you have a great story about city lights in this room. So I'd like to hear that story, and I can tell a little bit about my city lights stories or story as well.
Okay, my city light story is starts with me dropping out of school. The last grade I finished was ninth grade. And I ended up living on the street in San Francisco, a young acid casualty, trying to make my way through the world. And I was living behind the heliport in Sausalito when I wasn't crashing on somebody's couch up here, and wandering around with a cheap Japanese guitar. And I played every night of the week from about 8 or 9 till about 2 or 2:30 in the morning, every night of the week. Across the street in that storefront right across the street, it was a bank. At another time, it was a restaurant. That was the front line of like my war on poverty. I had a band that played there sometimes, and I would come in here before there was no point in going out there early because there weren't enough people out to make it worthwhile. And so we would I would come over here, and I read my way through this bookstore, and I read the Travels of Marco Polo, and I read Dostoevsky, and I read just a million different weird Martin Buber writing about I and Thou, weird books, that I just was fascinated by. And then I would go out and play on the street all night, and some days when I was so tired, it was hard to sleep out in the junkyard because there'd be a lot of trouble out there some nights, and different things. And I could be really tired, and I would come over here, and I would just go up above the cash register. There was a room up there, and there was books in there, and they'd let me read, and I would fall asleep, and they would let me sleep here. And I would wake up, I got to get out on the street corner and go out there, At one point, we were out on the street corner. It was me and my friend Crazy Horse Danny was the guy that I played on the street with. And this guy comes across the street. Hey, my name's Alan. You guys mind if I sit in? And it was Allen Ginsberg. And so, no, man, sure, Peter, this is Danny. You guys know how to play country blues? Yeah, man. So he started playing it. He's just like probably the most famous poet maybe in the world at that point, but at least in America. And like the tourists were coming on the street, nobody recognized him. Right. There were like streams of people going by, and he's just out there making up songs with us. We're playing blues changes and just going on and on and on, like singing these hilarious songs. And then we rode around with him and Peter Orlovsky. It took us. We'd ride around the van, and he'd drop names to us and all this. But that's not the city light story. I met Lawrence Ferlinghetti here. Me and Denise came down, and we met them on the 60th anniversary of the store. And I had said, Lawrence, when I was a kid, you let me read my way through the store, and I really appreciate it, and I learned so much here, and I really kind of got my education here in a way, and I used to go up above the cash register and sleep up there. And he goes, ah, yes, the science fiction room. It's not there anymore, but so that's my story. And then in this particular room, I mean, I don't know, I've come up here a lot. The poetry at City Lights, and that's my story about City Lights, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's great. And my story is not nearly as good. Not that it's a competition, but no. But my story is just growing up in the East Bay in the suburbs. That this was the beacon, and without having money, we would come out here, and we figured out where we could park for free at the very, very top of Russian Hill. You could usually get one spot, and then we'd walk all the way up and go to a show at the Mabuhay, and then come here and read books for free, because we couldn't afford to buy them. And it was that thing of probably not being as studious as you, reading right through, but just picking up a book, usually a poetry book, and opening it and finding something that just opened your mind. And I think that's the beauty of physical stores, is that ability to really surf in the truest way versus on the internet, which is much more linear, and also to talk to people who can make recommendations that are based on their heart and not based on an algorithm. And the problem with the way algorithms suggest things to people is that they give you back more of what you're already into. And that actually is narrowing people's tastes. And historically, with the way people made recommendations in record stores, and thankfully still in bookstores are able to do, is the opposite. That, if you say, yeah, I'm really into Nick Drake, somebody wouldn't say, well, you should listen to this other folk person. They'd probably say something like, yeah, you should listen to some death metal from Sweden. I think you'd like that, like because it has the similar, like texture, whatever, like you'd get something different from it, or you should listen to Jimmy Cliff, you should listen to that, and that's what we're missing now a lot as well. But anyway, so this store means the world to me. It's a great place.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. It's a beacon, and um, it's a great place. It's a resource.
Yes.
In our town,
Yeah.
and in the world, really, at this point. Yeah. The polemics in your book, like you're kind of a shotgun man, and you, the stories are one thing, and then you're just blasting away at all sorts of things. But I did find it interesting, and in the back of the book, you had a guide about what to do if you wanted to do something about things. And I mean, one thing I can say about you is you're putting your money where your mouth is, and you're walking it, because you're out there working on this thing that you're willing to go listen and to deal with this whole and put yourself in danger. And the stories in the book about the thugs and all the different stuff, are very fascinating. Talk a little bit about that last part of the book where you have the guide to. Do you feel comfortable talking about that?
I mean, I can talk about. I mean, the difference with this book versus this book, and the other book is that the narratives were, woven throughout, and the didactic stuff would be there. This book was meant to be the narratives alone, exclusively. This is a manifesto, so it meant to distill everything down. This one is the narratives, more novelistic, with the didactic stuff just a little in the beginning, a little bit the end chapter, but then embedded, throughout as well in a more organic way. But I'll tell you, like, an example of the stories, which is not in here, and this is why it kind of continues, and what we're up against in terms of time and resources a lot of times, that it's hard to recapture those dynamics with people to understand like how fleeting it can be and how limited the resources is. We went all the way to Lesotho, which is a very difficult place to go to. You can't go directly there. And we're in Lesotho to record Famo music. And we were going to record a group that was way, way up in the mountains. So it's like 4 hours dangerous drive in the snow. It's winter there. And we would have like an hour or two with them and then have to drive back before dark because you can't drive after dark because there's, ice and everything. And so basically we had one shot to do this with these guys. And the Famo music have gangs, and the murder rate in Lesotho is very high, and most of it comes from Famo musicians. And so, but I'm like, yeah, well, I'm very careful about this stuff. I take it very seriously. Like, I'm not trying to take risk at all. I'm quite the opposite. But I thought this is more dangerous than normal, but I think it's okay if we manage it. And I take it especially seriously because we bring our daughter who's 7, and it's like I'm not trying to be macho at all. So we get there, we've done all this, it's been planned for years, we're finally doing it. We get up to do this drive and we pull out onto the street, and there are these billboards that give you the day's headline. And the day's headline was "Yet Another Famo Music Massacre." That was the headline. And I was like, oh fuck, I think I made a mistake here. And so we're driving, and I'm talking to the guy that we're driving with, and he goes, I won't even play Famo music in my car because I'm afraid I'll be playing the wrong band and I'm going to get shot by somebody. So he goes, I don't even play Famo music. This guy was playing Phil Collins in his car, right? This is a true story, right? It's driving me nuts, right? We're driving through the mountains. He's playing Phil Collins, intentionally playing Phil Collins, and intentional Phil Collins listening is the worst of all. So there he was listening to Phil Collins. We're going there. We get there. We record with these guys. But it was beautiful and it was amazing, but we had so little time, so little time. Just basically, again, I set up as quick as I could. Let's go. We recorded nonstop for like an hour and a half. The sun's going down. Take some pictures. See, give them some money. See you. Bye. But it was beautiful because this young guy who was had a woundedness about him, the main singer. Most of his songs were about the violence. Like he said, finally, I found a group of guys that can play with where there's not violence. It's not a gang, and how I refuse to join the gangs. Like almost every song is about this. And it was incredible, because it's, you can find a million Famo bands, but nobody writes songs like these guys. Nobody plays with like the more vulnerability and texture that they would. But there's like this little window, and that's it, and a lot of the records have been made that way. The Acholi Machan record that from South Sudan that Stephen has the shirt for, that was done in like a matter of hours. They came all the way up from the southern part of South Sudan. They came up on motorcycles. They came to the Capitol. They came to where we were. We set up under a tree. We recorded for like an hour and a half or 2 hours, took some pictures, and they left and went back to the southern part of South Sudan, down on the border with Uganda. And the record's great. The record's awesome. But it's not what I would ideally want to do. I want to push it that much. The Fra Fra record, it was the same thing. From northern Ghana, they came. They literally danced to us. Like it took them a long time. Like they were just taking forever because they were just dancing the whole way. We could see them kicking up dust, and they're coming. They're already playing. I think they thought we were somehow going to record that, and it's like, well, I can't record that. You're like 300 yards away. But it was great. And they come up, and then we recorded this whole record in like an hour or two, and that was it. We had to go, and they had to go. So I think it shouldn't be belabored, but at the same time, ideally, you would have more cushion and more time. It's nice to have that luxury. So like with the Zomba Prison Project record, we were lucky. We spent, almost 2 weeks there, and we recorded every day, and we had a lot of material, more than enough material that we would need. But the majority of the record was when they finally let us record with the women, which they didn't want us to go to the women's side. There were 64 women in a prison that was holding 2,300 people plus people that was built to hold 360 people. And the women were in this little area apart from the men. And they didn't want us to go there because they didn't want us to see that they keep their children there with them in prison. But they're only allowed to keep one child, and one child under the age of 5. So they have to choose which child that's going to be. And when the child turns 5, they take the child away from them. So they didn't want us to see any of that. They also didn't want us to see the rats that run around back there, these huge rats. And so finally, they let us go back there and meet them, but still they wouldn't let us record. Final day, they said, you're going to record. We went there, and the women said, well, we're not singers. We can, do some traditional songs or dance, but we're not singers. We're not songwriters. And kept saying, well, what's the song? Just anything. Like I had the mic set up, just like, just you can speak, you can do a poem, you can do a 30-second song. It doesn't have to have words, whatever you want to do. So finally one woman goes, okay, I'll sing. And I'm down kneeling in the dirt, and I've got the headphones on, and I hear her start to sing, and her voice sounds unlike any voice I've ever heard in my life. And that's so special and so refreshing, because normally you hear people in Western media and it's like you can draw the arrows, like go Stevie Nicks, Bob Dylan, like this, you can hear the influences. No, this is just somebody communicating. And then I look up after she's done with like this 60-second song, which was just gutting the song, like how direct it was and how honest it was about being abandoned and being in prison. And I look up, and there's a line of people behind her, and the other women had lined up. And so we went for 90 minutes, and they would each take a turn, usually a 1 or 2 minute song. Then they would get back in line, many of them, and then they keep going, and then they get back in line. Some of them wouldn't, some of them would, and they kept going. And those 90 minutes are more than half of the debut record that got nominated for the Grammy Award. So we were there for almost 2 weeks recording them in, and there was a lot of good stuff, but the majority of the record was from those 90 minutes. So you just never know for sure. Completely not belabored and completely risky, especially when you got a shitty engineer like me, like sitting there trying to capture this stuff. And I'm always afraid, like, I'm going to mess it up. Like, that something's going to go wrong, or it's going to get lost, or something. But we've been very fortunate in that regard. So as far as, technologically, things have, knock on wood, things have usually worked out.
There's a couple stories in the book. That's a story about recording in the United States, and there's a story about Mobile, and I'm interested in that story. And there's another story in there about Mobile, Alabama, and what's the other one? Yeah. Go ahead. Talk about going to Mobile. It's really interesting to see your chapter about Mobile. As is the chapter about San Francisco is pretty interesting too. Your take on that. But go ahead. I would love to hear you describe the Mobile like the way you describe it in that book.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can describe it like I did in the book or not, but we turned our attention also to people who are marginalized, minoritized within any nation, and so there's a lot of that in America. So we did the record with the homeless in Oakland. We did the record with my sister's community, the disabled community in the East Bay. And we were I was interested in going to Parchment Prison, but they wouldn't let me come. So this went on for years and years and years, and they said no. The chaplain said yes, and then the bureaucracy, the administration said no. And then there's the record in Africa Town, and you know, in Mobile, and the record really is about you know, is about, you know, the fact that communities like this have been fractured by industry on purpose, and you know, the pollution that they're subjected to, and the way that that's affected the community, you know, in terms of life expectancy. And so a lot of the sounds from the record are the sounds of the factories that surround them on all sides, and also the road that they put right through them just to fracture them, which is, you know, that's colonialism 101. You know, you just draw a border, boom, you know, and you split a people in half. So the Talish people, the in Azerbaijan, the centenarians, same thing. They just draw a line through their community and break them in half, and so they had done that there. And you know, it's a spectrum in terms of the music, but what really drew me to it in many ways was that there's a guy there playing a kalogo, which is from northern Ghana, which is what Fra Fra played. He didn't call it a kalogo. He didn't know what it was. He had some name that somebody told him, but it's not the right name, I don't think, or at least not the name from Ghana. And he was playing blues on a kalogo, and I thought, well, that's pretty fascinating. You know, like somehow that this, you know, resonates, or the echo of that, and how much, you know, music making has been fractured. And so while we were there, we also, you know, searched around a lot of gospel, found a lot of stuff that wasn't very good, kind of histrionic, but, you know, continuing to try to search for that. And that motivated me again to be like, well, I'm going to contact Parchment Prison again, you know, because it was like we were right there, but we couldn't do it on that trip. But still, just somehow energetically, I'm like, well, now, you know, come on, like they're here. So I wrote them and said, you know, like I'd like to come, and they said no, and I said, well, you know, I'm coming on these dates. I can come for one day. You know, I promise, you know, I'll bring a little equipment, and you know, and you know, I'll donate money to the prison, and you know, we'll do this, and they said no, and then right at the last minute, about a week before, they said okay, you can come. And so I went and recorded, and again, had no idea what I was going to hear, what I was going to find, but it was incredible. And it was so incredible that the record received a lot of attention unexpectedly in this day and age. You know, the BBC did a feature, the Guardian did a feature, the New York Times wrote about it, the New Yorker did a feature, but none of that was what impressed the prison. What impressed the prison was that there was a young news guy who saw the thing that was in BBC, and wanted to do a local news report. So that's what thrilled the prison administration. They were on the local news, you know, they were on ABC Mississippi. So at that point, they're just like, whatever you want, you come back anytime you want, you know, you carte blanche, you got it. And so I went back earlier this year and recorded again. And I think that the record's going to come out next year. I think it's even better, right? Because they had more confidence. They wrote their songs. There were some new people that were also there in this case. And, you know, there's a song that's out now, actually already, an advanced single called Parchment Prison Blues, which is 6 of them. The last song we recorded out of 30 songs, more than 30 songs, where they were just improvising non-verbally their pain and longing at being there. And 4 of them are there for life. One of them is 66 years old. He's been there since he was 23, and he's never going to get out. You know, he has such a beautiful voice, and he's worked so hard on himself, and you can hear, you know, the regret and the redemption in his voice. I feel like a parole hearing, they should just have him sing, and then it would be like, let him go. You know, he deserves to be out in the world more than most people. You know, that's what they should be listening to. You know, I mean, that's the proof right there. If you don't hear the humanity in that voice, then you shouldn't be someone making those decisions to begin with.
I'm also interested in like younger people, like youth, and like what you've noticed about were there people, younger musicians that you've recorded around the world, and can you talk about how this kind of music would be carried forward as opposed to mass media music through young people?
Yeah, I mean, we record with kids a lot, you know, and the great thing about kids is they're never out of tune, and they're never out of time. They're not self-conscious at all usually. And I think that's kids around the world. And my daughter, who's 7, you know, a lot of the parents are like, well, what should we do with our kids? You know, most of them don't know that I do music or whatever, but some of them kind of know. So they'll ask, and I'll be like, well, do not send them to, you know, an opera teacher. Don't send them to ballet. Don't send them to these places that are going to tell them they're bad and wrong. Just let them express themselves. and trust themselves and have confidence in themselves and not be focused on right and wrong. And in fact, the teacher at her school, at my daughter's school, is like this big wig. She's made a whole industry for herself in town. She does this big production play. It's all about her, you know, these little kids. It's all about her. And so they did this thing at this big local theater in our town, and you know, a whole year. And she's stressing out, and she's really mean to the kids and stuff like that. And so then I asked my daughter afterwards. I'm like, they did 2 shows, you know, so they did like this. It's some of the classes in the morning and some in the afternoon. So my daughter's was the earlier show. And when they were done, I said, what did she say to you afterwards? Did she say thank you? Did she say hi? Did she say great job? And she said nothing. She just walked away, right? She was on to the next show, you know? And I'm like, that's the way music gets fractured. That's the way that things become a problem. Instruments are a big issue for people, and the traditions largely are gone. And so when we were in Lesotho, I'll give you an example, was that this guy, you know, we were talking to this guy trying to find stuff, and so the FAMO group was amazing, but we needed to flesh it out a little bit more. And I was like, you know, if there was just, maybe there's some folks that, you know, that just could sing some songs, older songs or whatever, you know, folk songs they've written. And he's like, I don't know anybody. And this guy's like in his 30s. And I'm like, well, how long have you lived in it's a pretty big village. It's like 10,000 people spread out. And I'm like, well, how long have you lived there? My whole life. And I'm like, okay, well, what about before? And he goes, I've never known anybody in the village that sang, you know? So it's really like the end of that's severing. In Africa Town, it was similar, that there's this jazz guy, and like he was talking about, well, in our era, his era, this guy's getting close to his 80s, piano was the blues instrument, because when radio came in, everybody threw away their pianos. And so they would go then get the pianos and recycle them. And he said, we learned to play by playing around the broken keys. That's how we learned to play, like to play what keys were available to us. And so that tradition is largely gone. But in Lesotho, you know, it's like he's asking this guy and asking around. So finally he goes, yeah, we'll go out to this place. I know these people, and they can, and, you know, like, and they sing. And I'm like, all right. But you know, I wasn't very into the idea of driving like a long distance again, but we did it. We go out there, and these singers were like really like not just, I mean, usually it's a thing like they're too performative, but it was just like they just were not into it, and they were not, you know, not really singers. And I'm like, wow, that's you know, it's not, it's pretty, you know, just communicate, you know, like, and these people didn't exist. So I was pretty disgruntled by it, like saddened by it. We'd come all that way. And then we were back at the hotel, and there was this woman that was there working at the hotel, and I was looking at her, and I could just tell, like, this is a musical person, this particular individual, right? And it's the quiet person, you know. And I really believe it's about listening to the meek and the ignored and the denied, and not the people that say, I'm a musician and I want to be recorded and heard and seen. So I went up to her, you know, she could speak a little English. And at this point, I had nobody to help me or support me. And you know, I was afraid, like, okay, am I going to offend her, or am I going to seem nuts? Is she going to be scared? But I went up to her and I just said, hey, you know, I'd be interested if you wanted to sing a song, you know, like I've got some microphones, and like, if you wanted to sing. And she goes, okay, right, yeah, I'll do that, right? And she's like, now? And I'm like, yeah, let's go, right? So we just went there, and she just like sang like 3 songs, and it was like, that's what I've been looking for. That's what you know, running around the country. It was just so direct and so simple, and no ego, just 100% communication. And it was so beautiful. And it's not a commercial voice, you know, but there's a great beauty in that voice. And those are the voices I'm interested in. Those are the voices that I think are important. And I think with auto-tune, you know, like what we've lost so much is the humanity, and the humanity is in the airs, right? That's what makes usually most artists great, are the things they're not doing on purpose, the rhythmical things, the melodic things. So I was standing in the hotel the other day here in San Francisco, and they were playing Motley Crue. They were playing Home Sweet Home. And I was listening to this, you know, with new ears, you know, and like hearing it. And he's so flat on that song, and it's great. It's awesome. Like, it's what makes it good, right? Because he's really just like, sounds like, you know, this guy like that's just crying about missing his home, and you know, like singing, you know, and he's so vulnerable sounding, and it's like, that song could never be made today. I'm not saying it's the greatest song ever, but it could never be made because they'd fix it, right? And the thing that really makes it is he's flat, and so flat most of the song. And so, you know, not that he was not a great singer, and that's why he was flat. I'm sure they punched him in every note, but he was still flat, you know. But it had this yearning to it, and I was like, that's interesting, because that's missing from music right now. That's missing, where it's all so airbrushed all the time. And so, you know, that's the thing. I was on a plane. It was when I was doing a recording parts from prison. I was on a plane, and the guy next to me, you know, doesn't look like a music kind of guy visibly, but he sits down next to me. He's with his partner. I don't know if it was his business partner or his wife, romantic partner. I don't know. He sits down, and he opens up Polestar, and I'm like, oh, you're reading Polestar, and he's all, yeah, and I'm all, why are you reading Polestar? You know, and he goes, I'm a promoter from, I think it was Nashville or somewhere. We were flying to some intermediary city. And so we started talking a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. He'd come from, I think Polestar was having their convention in Atlanta. We were routing through Atlanta. And so I said to him, what percentage of people that you do concerts with now are not using backing tracks? And he said 0. None, right? None of them. He goes, except the jam bands. He goes, the jam bands, no. He goes, everybody else to varying degrees are using it. The stakes are too high, you know, like the average ticket price for Taylor Swift in a football stadium was $1,000. They're grossing more for a single concert than the Rolling Stones did for an 18-month world tour in a single night. So the stakes are high. It's understandable. You can't go out there and fail. You've got to do the opposite. You've got to be able to go out there and give the people what they want, to hear the record, basically. But for me, you know, growing up here with Bill Graham and going to shows and stuff, most of the memories were about when things went awry. That's the stuff you remember. That's the stuff that was beautiful, you know, when somebody lost their voice. I saw Tom Waits here on New Year's Eve one time, and he was contracted to sing until midnight, and he lost his voice at 11:45. You know, and so that's the main thing I remember. So for the last 15 minutes, he's on stage, like getting everybody to, like, you know, he's guiding people for 15. He's just milking it out, you know, for 15 minutes, and then it's midnight. They drop the balloons. He gets his check, but then he'd rested his voice for 15 minutes, and then he came out then with no pressure and did like 2 songs that were way better than anything he'd done all night long, you know, because his voice had a little bit of rest. But I'll always remember that, him losing his voice. It was worth the price of admission. You know, I mean, it's the greatest thing ever. You know, I remember seeing the Replacements at the Berkeley Square in Berkeley, and when Bob Stinson was, you know, alive, and that Tommy Stinson couldn't play, so they had to pull people out of the audience and have them play bass that couldn't play bass, and it was one of the best things I ever saw. It was incredible. They had people, you know, singing lead on songs, pulling them out of the audience, kids and stuff. It was great, you know, and so that's missing, you know, now, because people want things to be perfect and scheduled. And they don't want the band to be late and all that kind of stuff.
Well, good for them. Are there any questions? Yes, sir. We're going to take some questions now.
Thanks. I'm just wondering, I keep waiting for the response to all of this airbrushing. Like we hope that there's going to be a return, a backlash, or you know, a generation that's going to be, this is bullshit. Do you see that? Do you have hope for that? Have you seen glimpses of that? Because I wish I did, and I don't really. Just wondering in your travels if you've seen anything that gives you some glimmer that this might be on the horizon.
Yeah, I mean, I think that music just isn't as central culturally as it was, you know, for a long time, and so it's more peripheral. You know, it's accompanying visuals, and I think a lot of the artists now, they're visual artists. They're not really, you know, musical artists. They're visual artists who happen to play music as well, and people identify them through their imagery, and all the edge is in the imagery. You know, like you see these people, and they've completely assimilated and co-opted all the punk rock stuff, and I'm a sucker for it every time. You know, like I see it and I go, they're like, okay, here's this person, and they're this and they're that, and they've got all this identity shit, and that's their story, and they're looking all, you know, like they got the piercings and all, they're all extreme, and all their staging is like Cirque du Soleil or something, and then you hit play, and it's just like it's the most saccharine stuff ever, over and over again. It's incredible. But visually, you know, it's like, ooh, look out, you know, they look tough, you know. So I don't know. I mean, but there's good music being made. There's great music being made. It's just not being heard as much. That's more the problem.
Yeah, one thing going on now is that there's a lot more people listening to music and playing it than ever before. And so, like, I did a tour in 1977 with the Nerves, and there was maybe one band in every town. Now there's more bands in like the hotel across the street, than there were like what am I trying to say? There's more bands in a hotel like in Kalamazoo, Michigan, than the whole United States had in 1977. And so what you have is this incredible, people want to have an authentic relationship to music, just like the two most important things that people are advertising and music. Those are the two most omnipresent factors of our society. And everybody wants to be in a band or have an authentic relationship to it in some way, you know? But that means that it's like, there's a million billion people. That's why Spotify's getting rich, because there's a million people with 1,000 listens that are, trying to pay to get their stuff listened to more, and everybody wants to be heard, you know? But it's a whole different scene here, man. And so maybe this is the scene right here. This is the backlash. Like, you never really know when you're present at the backlash. Like, if you're at the Mabuhay Gardens in 1977 at the Nerve show, it was like we toured with the Ramones in 77, and it's a lot of the shows, there was 100 people there. They weren't packed, and then like that was like, now everybody's like, oh, it was like the musical revolution, but you never know when you might be present at a revolution. You've got to keep your eyes open.
Yeah. And like Peter said, over 100,000 songs are uploaded to Spotify daily. That's the same number of records that were released in the entire year in 1987. So it's a very different thing. And you're competing against volume. And what that means is the default for people is negativity, not open-mindedness. All of us, right? We have to say no all the time. We have to judge things in a snap way all the time. And we do, and that's the danger over and over again, where people are less open because it's just too overwhelming.
I agree with you, though, that like one of the places where I have a problem with this is that composition and work on music involves not just like learning how to sing opera or something, but it learns how to how to let things fall and how to let things come out. And so, the people who, one of the things about the people that you listen to, those 100,000 records that got loaded up today, is there's nothing to a lot of it. It sounds just like everything else, and every once in a while you come on somebody, and they're not necessarily some guy who just sang for the first time at the gas station. They're a guy that they could be people that have like learned how to express things in a natural way, it takes a lot of study in a way to learn how to be like a free spirit,
Yeah. No, we're in agreement, 100% in agreement. Neurologically, I've done sessions with neuroscientists, and when you study the brain of an amateur and you study the brain of a virtuoso, they're the same, right? In terms of what they're doing with their brain, and it's basic freedom, right? And music lights up more of the brain than any other activity, uses more different parts of the brain than any other activity. And that's why it connects so much with people that have Alzheimer's or dementia, is that they can be nonverbal. And yet if you put on, Sweet Home Alabama or whatever it is, they'll sing it. They'll sing the words, so it's a powerful thing. But yes, certainly I think what got misconstrued a lot is I think punk rock wasn't about anybody could be a star. Punk rock, in my view, was that no one should be stars, right? And so now it's like everybody wants to be a star, and it's this gateway, and corporations love it, because if music is mediocre and not bad or good, then they're in control of it. And so mediocrity is the enemy, not good or bad. Right? Bad music can be the greatest music of all. Bad films can be the greatest films of all. Some of the best films ever made are horrible, and that's why they're so good, because they're so bad, accidentally.
In the best possible scenario, what do you want your polemic to do to us? What effect do you want it to have?
The best possible scenario is if it enriches one person's life for 30 seconds, then it's a success. That's it. You know, I don't have any of these delusions. I think that unfortunately, because of Rodriguez and Nick Drake, you know, and Big Star, you know, most people have prolonged their you know, quest for stardom and importance. You know, they never give it up because they think like, okay, well, I'm going to be that, and it's like, no, you're not. You know, you're not Nick Drake. You're not going to be that. You're not Big Star, and that shouldn't be the goal anyway. But I do believe that some of this music might find a bigger audience, and that might mean 10 people instead of 2, you know, in 10 years or in 20 years, if music's even around without the permanence. The nice thing when there's CDs and especially vinyl is there's some permanence to it. You know, it's not going to just vanish into thin air someday. But like I've said before, and I really mean this, I think the good ones are the Nick Drake of world music. I think that 20, 30 years from now, I think people will still be listening to them. Not in great numbers, but people who go to City Light Books and read books for free, yes, they'll be listening to them maybe, you know, and that's the goal. You know, the goal is nothing beyond that. And also just maybe that people think about things just a little bit differently, because I think a lot of times the educational things are just things that open your eyes to look for more. It's not like they teach you everything. They just kind of shift the perspective. And I think it's very important that we realize that usually they're just moving front people around for capitalism now, and they call it diversity. But when you have like people from the largest economy in Africa being the front people singing in English, that's not real diversity, what it could be, when Nigeria alone has over 2,000 languages, you know, so it's not representing Nigeria even. South Korea, the same thing. I mean, this mega powerful, you know, economy that's been engineered by the heiress to Samsung, one of the most powerful companies in the world. That's fine, it's great, but it's not a meritocracy. It's not even close to that. And most nations remain invisibilized. And there is music everywhere, great music everywhere.
Anybody else in here? I would like to add a little something. You know, yes. During the pandemic, Ian delivered a wonderful conflict resolution class to the staff at City Lights, because we were getting people coming into the store and not wanting to wear masks and like knocking over displays, and the staff was really freaked out. And Ian did a really great job and just kind of like giving us some ideas of how you can work with people. So my question is like, could you talk a little bit about, you know, you've been through a lot of different situations on borders where people are heavily armed. What is it about the human experience? What is it that you can relate to and that somehow, you know, allows you to communicate with someone who might be in a bad space? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, I think you're trying to always appeal to the healthy aspect of the individual, and it exists. And so I think if we're being non-judgmental, there's a lot of these things we talk about, but they don't have meaning. So to be specific, if we're being non-judgmental, then I know that on this spectrum from 1/1,000,000th of 1% to 99.9%, there's some goodness in this individual. And that's what I'm trying to appeal to. When I was at Parchman Prison the second time this February, they had me in the chapel alone with 14 guys, no chaplains, no guards for 4 hours. Well, I think I want to appeal to the healthy aspect of their personality. And I think with music, I was, you know, and I trusted them, and I think they trusted me, and I think they enjoyed being there because it was a privilege for them. I mean, they were getting out of this hellish existence, and we were going to eat a big meal, and that was a big deal for them. And so, you know, it was nice, but you try to appeal to that, and you try to lead with love. And I think what's really important when we talk, I mean, it's always, you know, bittersweet when people from America try to advise me about the danger in other countries, because I'm like, look a little closer at where you live, right? You know, I mean, you know, really, you know, like this is a very competitive, dangerous culture, and that's not the norm globally. That's not at all the norm. Yeah, so it's you know, it's interesting. So that's not to put down on America. It's just to say that there's danger everywhere and there's goodness everywhere. And most war-torn countries we've been to, you would not know they're war-torn unless you knew it. And so when we went to Azerbaijan, and this is similar to the FAMU thing, coming out and seeing this headline about, you know, okay, FAMU, you know, music massacre the day before we're going to go meet a FAMU group. When we went to Azerbaijan, we wake up we drove to the south, to the Tawish Mountains, and we woke up the next morning, and it was that the war had reignited on the border with Armenia and Azerbaijan. I'm like, shit, like our timing's pretty bad. But that was it, right? You never would have known. I never would have known if I hadn't read it on the BBC. It wouldn't have affected us. But I think the thing that people forget a lot, and it's very important, is that people in countries that are quote unquote violent, the countries where people are quote unquote terrorists, that most people are terrorized by those terrorists, including the people that live there, and nobody more than those people. And so most people want nothing more than peace. They want nothing more than kindness and incredible generosity. I mean, the generosity that is the greatest is usually with those who have the least. And so it's very important that we listen to people, and it's really about listening. The willingness to listen to people is so important, because that's the only way we can potentially learn.
Well, yeah.
Probably this question already got answered or asked, but how do you catch wind of the invisibilized artists?
Oh, how do we do that? Well, I not entirely is a bad answer, but I think that it's just, you know, if you throw a dart at a map of the world, you're going to more likely hit an underrepresented place than not. On one of the book tours, and not to shame people, but on one of the book tours, just to make the point, I would go around and I would say, well, who's your favorite artist from London? And people would be like, David Bowie, or, they, maybe it wasn't somebody from London, but they think it was, British, whatever. They'd be close, they could name 10 people from London. Who's your favorite artist from New York? The Ramones and Frank Sinatra, and again, whatever. So they'd name 10 people. Then it'd be like, okay, who's your favorite artist from the Central African Republic? Nobody, right? Who's your favorite artist from Laos? Nobody. And me too. I mean, I'm not shaming anybody. And then one of the questions I would ask sometimes was, who's your favorite artist from Comoros? And people are like, what is Comoros? They didn't even know what it was. And I'm like, well, we have to go there now. Like people they can't name a musician. They don't even know the country exists, and so we did. And the music there was incredible. Like, I think that the music that Subi and Madi made, they're so yin and yang, these two guys, the way they play differently and make their own instruments is incredibly beautiful on this little island with this smaller population. And so, that's the motivation largely, is that you just go, you believe it's there, you try to find it, and almost without fail it is. But again, that can be anywhere in any culture. Ghana is kind of held up by a lot of people as a success story, and there's truth to that, there's nuance to that. But like with the Fra, their language, they make up only 3% of the population, and it's like speaking a foreign language in your own country. Most people can't understand you. South Sudan, which we've been talking about a lot, here's an example of South Sudan and the problem that we face is that on the list of places that you cannot have visited if you're not a U.S. citizen, if you visited these places, you can't come into the U.S. On that list, it's Afghanistan and Yemen, and there's eight countries, and one of them is Sudan. So we would come into the country. This happened 3 different times, and Marilena would get stopped, and they'd say, "You can't come in." Why not? Because you went to Sudan. No, we went to South Sudan. No, you went to Sudan. No, South Sudan. These are border patrol agents. Like, there's only 200 countries, 200 plus countries. So it's like, no, South Sudan. Well, and so eventually they get it, you'd kind of have to just educate them, like, no, yes, they probably did a bad branding of their new country, right? Like they absolutely did, right? I mean, they should have, called it anything but something. But like even those individuals didn't really have knowledge of this place. And this wasn't 1 year after, like when we went and did the record. This was 10 years after, and they still didn't have really much knowledge of the place. So that's how we go, is just talking to people. And usually you find people from other people, from other people, from other people. In Rwanda, took us 2 weeks. We finally found somebody that was, I thought, really good. And he's like, if you think I'm good, you got to meet these guys that taught me how to play. And I was like, well, no, you're good. No, you got to meet these guys. And he was right. And that's the good ones. We've done 5 albums with them. So, yeah.
Well, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Peter, do you want to? Oh, Jeff.
You've talked and written a lot about looking apart from people who play well and or sing well. Is it possible for people, has it been possible, will it be possible for people who play and or sing well to make good music?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's I think what you're asking is kind of what Peter and I were talking about a little bit. That you know there is something to effort, and you know it's not, you know, first thought, best thought can be great, but there's something to really working hard at something, and you know it's that idea, like, how long did it take you to write that book? How long did it take you to write that song? The answer is always the same. It took my entire life to do it. You know, everything up to this point. And so the more effort you're putting to that, the better. And I really am a purist about this ultimately, is that I find it disturbing when people try to put it on this you know this relativistic model where, well, everybody's an artist. No, they're not. No, they're not, right? Everybody is creative. Everybody is creative, but that's not being an artist. It's a different thing, you know. So we need to be clear about what that is. And the people that I know that are really that are motivated to do that, inspired to do that, it's not something that they make a decision about at a certain point when everything else hasn't worked out for them. It's something they had to do, right? From the time they were born, practically. They just burned with it, and it consumes them a lot of times, you know. And so, I mean, you talk about somebody like Kurt Cobain, or you talk about somebody like Jack Kerouac, or you talk about, you know, Ernest Hemingway. I mean, I'm not fetishizing that at all. I don't think that's the model to work from, but you can see the self-sacrificial element of that, right? With Nina Simone, like, it consumed her, you know, like it was a calling, you know, for her. And it's not, you know, it was almost like she had no choice in that. And it really took everything from her otherwise. But the gift that she gave to humanity, I believe, is does more psychotherapeutically than could be done with all the drugs in the world, essentially.
It takes a lot of work you know, it takes a lot of work to express a really simple idea in a way that anybody's going to get. And it also is a full-time job in this culture when you're so inundated with stuff. You have to sing through all the influences. You have to sing and play through all the pressures, live through the substances, past the broadcasts, you know, all this stuff. And it's, you know, you're decoding your own DNA of your own makeup. You know, you have to. You're like around. It's like being Ian going into your own psyche and looking for what's real, man. And you know, it's like being what do you call your line of work?
Poor.
It's like being poor, going into your own mind and trying to figure out what's real and what isn't, man. And that's like where finally, like, the job of the artist, you know, is to dedicate themselves to that, come, you know, hell or high water, you know. And so I imagine, you know, it's not the first stop on the tour, you know, it's way down the road, like Ian's showing us, man. So there you go, all the way around the block.
Thank you.
Thanks, City Lights. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, y'all, for coming out.
General Paulino.
Paulino, is that